In the heart of Los Angeles, California, a sleek private jet glided across the sky, descending toward a modern airport just blocks from a sprawling mansion. On board sat Pastor David E. Taylor, founder of the New Destiny Christian Center and a rising figure in American megachurch culture. To his followers, Taylor was a man of God, a prophet who delivered blessings, healing, and prosperity. To outsiders, he was a preacher with an unorthodox approach and a flair for the dramatic. But behind the sermons, glossy videos, and social media posts lay a pattern of lavish living and financial exploitation that would leave a trail of disillusioned congregants and legal scrutiny. David E. Taylor was born in 1961 in Atlanta, Georgia. He grew up in a middle-class home, attending church regularly and excelling academically. Early on, he demonstrated a talent for leadership and public speaking, often preaching at youth services and community gatherings. By his 20s, he had embraced ministry full-time, founding small congregations and building a reputation as a dynamic, energetic speaker. His messages combined charismatic theology, prosperity teachings, and motivational rhetoric that resonated with struggling communities eager for hope and opportunity. In 1995, Taylor founded the New Destiny Christian Center in Los Angeles. Starting with a small congregation, he quickly expanded, using media outreach, local television broadcasts, and a growing social media presence to reach tens of thousands. His sermons were theatrical, often incorporating music, personal testimonies, and high-energy appeals to the audience. He frequently preached about divine favor, asserting that financial donations would yield spiritual blessings and material wealth. This prosperity gospel framework became a cornerstone of his ministry, drawing large crowds eager for guidance and miracles. Taylor's personal lifestyle, however, contrasted sharply with the everyday struggles of his congregation. While members donated their tithes and offerings, often exceeding hundreds of dollars per week, Taylor's personal expenditures were extravagant. Investigative journalists documented his acquisition of luxury vehicles, high-end real estate, and international travel. Private jets were flown regularly, and his Los Angeles mansion was outfitted with designer furnishings, expansive pools, and entertainment facilities far beyond the reach of the average churchgoer. Financial mismanagement and ethical concerns began to surface when former church members and employees spoke out. Several alleged that Taylor pressured staff and congregants to contribute additional funds for kingdom projects that never materialized. Testimonials suggested that those who questioned donations or expressed financial strain were subtly marginalized or publicly shamed during services. The rhetoric of divine reward became a mechanism of control, compelling followers to give beyond their means in pursuit of spiritual favor. Legal scrutiny intensified in the late 2010s. Reports emerged that Taylor had failed to maintain transparent financial records for the ministry, raising questions about the flow of millions of dollars in donations. Investigators alleged that a significant portion of funds went toward personal luxury and lifestyle, rather than charitable or ministry initiatives. Although no federal charges were filed at the time, the public exposure of lavish spending on the backs of vulnerable congregants damaged Taylor's reputation and prompted civil inquiries. Social media became a battleground for Taylor's legacy. Video clips, memes, and news reports circulated widely, highlighting discrepancies between his preaching and personal wealth. In one viral video, he boasted of purchasing a private jet while simultaneously urging struggling members to plant seeds of faith in the form of financial donations. The cognitive dissonance between his public exhortations and personal indulgence fueled national debates about accountability in modern megachurch leadership. Despite controversy, Taylor maintained a core following. He adapted his messaging, emphasizing divine calling, spiritual warfare, and personal empowerment, framing criticism as attacks from the enemy meant to distract believers. Many congregants remained loyal, citing testimonies of personal healing, employment opportunities, and spiritual growth attributed to his guidance. This complex dynamic, of exploitation coexisting with genuine spiritual impact, highlighted the challenging line between leadership and abuse in religious institutions. Taylor's story raises broader questions about the role of charisma, influence, and financial power in faith communities. Psychologists studying megachurch dynamics noted that congregants often conflate spiritual authority with moral infallibility, creating an environment in which leaders can wield extraordinary control. In Taylor's case, the combination of persuasive rhetoric, prosperity promises, and public visibility allowed him to cultivate both devotion and dependency, creating a modern example of spiritual and financial manipulation. Reflection. David E. Taylor's saga illustrates the perilous intersection of faith, ambition, and wealth. The allure of prosperity and divine favor can obscure ethical boundaries, encouraging followers to invest trust and money into leaders whose actions may not reflect their teachings. Faith, when coupled with unchecked authority, can be exploited, and the fortunate promises may serve only those who already hold power. The pastor's mask is once again revealed. The public persona of holiness hides both human desire and moral compromise, challenging the faithful to discern the difference between spiritual guidance and personal gain. In the heart of Atlanta, Georgia, an opulent mansion sits behind iron gates, surrounded by manicured lawns and a fleet of luxury vehicles. Inside, Creflo Dollar, founder of World Changers Church International, prepares for another Sunday service, his tailored suit immaculate, demeanor commanding. To millions, he is a man of God, a spiritual mentor, and a messenger of divine abundance. To critics, he is a symbol of the modern prosperity gospel, a preacher who conflates faith with personal wealth, exploiting the generosity of his congregation for luxurious living. Born in 1962 in College Park, Georgia, Creflo Augustus Dollar grew up in a working-class environment. Raised by a devout mother who instilled in him both discipline and spiritual fervor, Dollar discovered early his talent for public speaking and ministry leadership. By the early 1980s, he had begun preaching full-time, captivating small congregations with his blend of scripture, motivational rhetoric, and promises of divine prosperity. His message was simple yet compelling. Faith, obedience, and giving would bring material blessings and personal transformation. Dollar's rise to prominence coincided with the growth of the televangelist movement. Through television, radio, and later digital media, his sermons reached millions. World Changers Church International grew from a small Atlanta congregation into a sprawling megachurch with thousands of weekly attendees. The church complex included auditoriums, administrative buildings, a private school, and a variety of media production facilities. The scale of the operation was a testament to both his charisma and ambition. However, as Dollar's empire expanded, questions about ethics, accountability, and the alignment of faith with personal enrichment began to surface. Investigative reports highlighted the juxtaposition between the pastor's lavish lifestyle and the economic struggles of many congregants. Dollar's personal holdings included multiple luxury homes, a private jet, designer cars, and international vacations, all funded primarily through tithes and donations from followers who often gave sacrificially, believing in the promise of divine multiplication. The controversy surrounding Dollar peaked in 2012 when reports emerged detailing the purchase of a $10 million Gulfstream G650 jet for church business. Critics argued that the acquisition represented the extreme excesses of the prosperity gospel, while Dollar defended it as a necessary tool for ministry outreach and global travel. In interviews, he framed the criticism as a misunderstanding of divine provision, asserting that God rewards faith and that financial stewardship should be judged spiritually, not materially. Beyond material excess, Dollar's ministry was accused of promoting a theology that could psychologically pressure followers to give beyond their means. Sermons frequently emphasized that donations were a seed for God's blessings, sometimes equating financial contribution with spiritual legitimacy. Former church members reported feeling coerced, guilty, or manipulated. believing that withholding donations could impede God's favor in their lives. This pattern mirrors a broader dynamic observed in some megachurches: the conflation of spiritual obedience with financial obedience, leaving vulnerable members susceptible to exploitation. Despite the public scrutiny, Dollar retained a loyal following. Thousands attested to personal transformations, healing, and life improvements they attributed to his ministry. Charitable programs, missionary work, and community outreach were indeed part of the church's operations, further complicating the narrative. To supporters, Dollar's wealth symbolized divine blessing and inspired faith. To detractors, it represented the moral hazard of unchecked authority and the potential for spiritual manipulation. Legal challenges occasionally shadowed Dollar's career. While no criminal convictions have been recorded, civil inquiries and media investigations questioned the transparency of church finances, the use of donations for personal enrichment, and the ethical implications of promoting the prosperity gospel. The dialogue surrounding Dollar became emblematic of a broader debate about accountability in religious institutions, how to balance spiritual leadership with financial integrity, and how congregants can navigate trust in environments that promise divine reward alongside material gain. Dollar's influence extends beyond the pulpit. Books, media appearances, and social media platforms have amplified his message, promoting prosperity theology on a global scale. His ministry has cultivated an international following, spanning continents, languages, and cultural contexts. While this expansion has provided opportunities for spiritual engagement, it has also perpetuated the ethical dilemmas inherent in megachurch leadership, particularly regarding the power dynamics between pastor and congregation. Reflection. Creflo Dollar's story embodies the tension between faith, fortune, and exploitation. His ministry demonstrates the appeal of prosperity theology and the allure of visible success, while simultaneously highlighting the vulnerabilities of those who give trust and money in pursuit of spiritual promises. Faith, when intertwined with unchecked authority and personal enrichment, can blur moral boundaries. The pastor's mask, once again, reveals a paradox. The public image of divine blessing can conceal patterns of manipulation and excess, challenging believers to discern between spiritual guidance and personal gain. In the glimmering skyline of Tampa, Florida, a grand church auditorium fills every weekend with the hum of anticipation. Women in elegant dresses, men in tailored suits, and families clutching their Bibles await the words of Paula White, a preacher known for her charisma, motivational energy, and unflinching message of prosperity. To her followers, she is a spiritual mentor, a conduit of blessings, and a guide to divine abundance. To critics, she represents the complex interplay between religious authority, wealth accumulation, and political influence, a pastor whose guidance has spurred both spiritual hope and controversy. Paula Michelle White was born in 1966 in Tupelo, Mississippi. She grew up in poverty, experiencing firsthand the struggles of economic hardship and unstable family circumstances. These early experiences profoundly shaped her ministry philosophy. She saw wealth, success, and prosperity as tangible evidence of God's favor. Moving to Orlando, Florida, in her late teens, she began participating in local churches, eventually entering full-time ministry. Her compelling storytelling, magnetic personality, and ability to connect personally with congregants helped her rise rapidly within charismatic Christian circles. By the 1990s, Paula White had founded the Without Walls International Church in Tampa, Florida. What began as a small congregation quickly grew into a megachurch, drawing thousands of attendees weekly. Her sermons blended spiritual guidance with personal development, emphasizing prosperity, success, and material blessing as evidence of faith. Congregants were encouraged to contribute financially, with the assurance that their seed gifts would yield abundant returns, both spiritually and materially. Television broadcasts, radio programs, and later online streaming expanded her reach nationwide. White's approach to ministry was unconventional in its embrace of both spirituality and media savvy. She presented herself as approachable yet authoritative, blending biblical teaching with contemporary life coaching. Her television programs featured testimonies of miraculous healing, financial breakthroughs, and transformed lives. These segments often encouraged viewers to donate, sometimes suggesting that financial giving was directly linked to divine favor, a hallmark of the prosperity gospel framework. While many experienced genuine inspiration, investigative scrutiny later revealed the mechanics of influence behind the scenes. Her rise to national prominence brought opportunities and criticism. White's affiliation with political power, particularly her advisory role to high-profile figures in Washington, D.C., highlighted the intersection of religious leadership and political influence. Serving as a spiritual advisor and counselor to politicians, she wielded her influence in ways that blurred traditional boundaries between faith and power. Critics argued that such relationships amplified the risk of exploiting congregants and supporters for personal or political gain, while supporters emphasized her role as a moral guide bridging faith and public life. Financial transparency became a major point of contention. Reports indicated that White's ministry amassed considerable wealth through book deals, speaking engagements, and donations, some of which were funneled into luxurious properties and personal assets. Investigative journalists noted that while the ministry conducted charitable outreach, significant funds supported lavish lifestyles and media production. This pattern, common among prosperity-focused ministries, raised ethical questions. Could spiritual guidance be disentangled from personal enrichment? Or was wealth accumulation an implicit measure of divine favor? White's public persona and ministry practices drew both admiration and scrutiny. Supporters praised her dynamic sermons, motivational speaking, and tangible demonstrations of spiritual impact. Congregants often shared stories of financial recovery, health restoration, and personal transformation attributed to her teachings. Critics, however, questioned the theological foundations of her prosperity preaching, arguing that it exploited vulnerable individuals seeking hope in times of economic or personal hardship. These debates highlighted the broader tension within modern evangelicalism, the balance between spiritual empowerment and potential manipulation. Legal and regulatory investigations intermittently followed White's career. Allegations centered on mismanagement of funds, failure to maintain financial transparency, and the potential for exploitation through donation-driven promises. While no criminal convictions were pursued, the scrutiny underscored the complexities of accountability in religious megachurches, particularly when leaders maintain both spiritual authority and media-driven influence. White's case exemplified how public admiration and private excess could coexist in a manner difficult to regulate or fully understand. Reflection. Paula White's story underscores the delicate line between inspiration and exploitation in faith leadership. Her dynamic charisma and motivational message drew millions, providing hope, guidance, and a sense of divine connection. Yet the intertwining of wealth, power, and spiritual authority demonstrates the risks inherent when religious influence is combined with material gain. The pastor's mask is revealed once more. A public image of blessing and mentorship can conceal both ambition and ethical ambiguity, challenging believers to discern authentic guidance from the allure of fortune. In the rolling hills of Fort Worth, Texas, a sprawling estate stands as a testament to both devotion and controversy. Gated and immaculately landscaped, it is the home of Kenneth Copeland, founder of Kenneth Copeland Ministries, a megachurch and broadcasting empire built on prosperity theology. Inside, Copeland prepares sermons for broadcast to millions of viewers worldwide. His confident voice, theatrical gestures, and promises of divine blessing captivate congregants. Yet behind the scenes lies a story of wealth accumulation, financial scrutiny, and ethical debate, a stark example of faith and fortune entwined. Kenneth Max Copeland was born in 1936 in Lubbock, Texas. Raised in a modest household, he experienced the challenges of growing up in a financially constrained environment. From an early age, Copeland demonstrated a gift for public speaking and a deep interest in religious study. In the 1950s, he embraced Pentecostalism and began ministering in small congregations across Texas, honing his preaching style that would later become both influential and controversial. By the 1960s and 1970s, Copeland's reputation as a dynamic preacher grew. He preached a message rooted in the Word of Faith movement, emphasizing that belief, speech, and financial giving could manifest health, success, and prosperity. Unlike traditional ministers, Copeland taught that faith itself was a force that could influence material reality. This prosperity gospel framework became the cornerstone of his ministry and the foundation of a rapidly expanding broadcasting empire. In 1967, Copeland and his wife Gloria founded Kenneth Copeland Ministries, initially operating from a small church in Texas. Over the next decades, the ministry grew into a megachurch with thousands of congregants, multiple campuses, and extensive media reach. Television programs, including Believer's Voice of Victory, spread Copeland's message across the United States and internationally. Viewers were encouraged to send donations as seed offerings to cultivate spiritual and material rewards. The messaging was clear. Financial contribution was both an act of faith and a pathway to divine blessing. The scale of Copeland's wealth became apparent over time. Investigative reports documented ownership of multiple luxury homes, private aircraft, high-end vehicles, and yachts. Notably, Copeland was reported to own a Boeing 747, an aircraft valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, which he defended as necessary for global ministry work. Critics argued that such wealth, funded primarily through congregant donations, exemplified the excesses of the prosperity gospel, while supporters maintained that his financial success reflected divine favor and effective ministry management. Copeland's practices drew public and media scrutiny. Journalists questioned the ethical implications of soliciting donations to fund lavish lifestyles, particularly when congregants were themselves struggling financially. Reports suggested that high-pressure tactics and appeals to spiritual obligation encouraged giving beyond means. Former church members recounted experiences of manipulation, where guilt and fear were used to encourage donations, framing financial support as evidence of faith and spiritual obedience. Despite controversy, Copeland retained a massive following. The ministry's outreach included charitable programs, disaster relief, international missions, and community support initiatives. Many congregants attested to life-changing experiences, financial breakthroughs, and personal transformation attributed to his ministry. This duality, spiritual empowerment paired with extreme personal wealth, created both admiration and condemnation, fueling national debates over the morality of prosperity-focused ministries. Legal and regulatory attention followed. The U.S. Senate Finance Committee, among other entities, investigated Copeland Ministries for tax-exempt compliance and financial practices. The questions focused on whether personal enrichment was improperly financed through church donations, the use of tax-exempt status for personal gain, and transparency of financial reporting. While no criminal convictions resulted, the scrutiny highlighted systemic challenges in regulating megachurch finances and the ethical complexities of faith-driven fundraising. Copeland's story also intersected with cultural influence. He became a fixture in the televangelist landscape, shaping the theology of prosperity for millions of viewers, influencing other ministers, and cultivating an international following. Books, conferences, and digital media further expanded his reach, blending religious authority with personal branding and media savvy. This fusion of faith, fortune, and influence positioned Copeland as both a spiritual leader and a symbol of the potential pitfalls of unchecked religious authority. Reflection. Kenneth Copeland's saga underscores the tension between spiritual leadership, personal wealth, and ethical responsibility. While millions claim to have benefited spiritually and materially from his guidance, the concentration of wealth and power in a single individual raises questions about accountability and integrity. The pastor's mask is once again revealed. A public image of divine authority and blessing can conceal personal ambition, financial excess, and the complex moral challenges inherent in modern religious leadership. Faith, fortune, and influence, when entwined, demand scrutiny, discernment, and vigilance from both followers and society at large. In the bright lights of Charlotte, North Carolina, a television studio buzzed with energy. Cameras rolled, lights shone down on an eager audience, and the charismatic couple at the center, Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker, preached promises of hope, salvation, and prosperity. They were the faces of the PTL Club, one of America's most influential televangelist ministries in the 1970s and 1980s. Millions of viewers tuned in weekly, captivated by their charisma, charm, and seemingly unshakable faith. But behind the smiles, flamboyant makeup, and golden teleprompters lay a story of betrayal, financial fraud, and moral collapse that would shake the nation. Jim Bakker was born in 1940 in Muskegon, Michigan. He grew up in a working-class family, drawn early to church leadership and public speaking. His wife, Tammy Faye, born in 1942 in International Falls, Minnesota, possessed a vibrant personality and a gift for connecting with people emotionally. Together they created a vision of ministry that was unprecedented. A televised program that combined evangelism, entertainment, and fundraising, promising viewers spiritual and financial rewards for their generosity. By the mid-1970s, the PTL Club had grown into a national sensation. The Bakkers' charismatic preaching, Tammy Faye's warmth, and their carefully staged television segments cultivated a devoted following. They promised viewers miracles, salvation, and prosperity, often requesting donations to fund ambitious projects, including the creation of Heritage USA, a Christian theme park designed to compete with Disney and showcase the ministry's success. Heritage USA became a symbol of both faith and excess. Covering over 2,300 acres, the complex included hotels, a water park, residential housing for staff and followers, and elaborate TV studios. Visitors marveled at its scale, believing they were part of a spiritual renaissance. Jim Bakker was hailed as a visionary, a preacher who turned divine calling into tangible success. But beneath the glossy veneer, financial mismanagement and moral compromise festered. The first cracks appeared in the mid-1980s when allegations emerged about lavish spending, sexual misconduct, and misuse of donations. Investigators revealed that millions of dollars intended for ministry purposes were redirected to fund personal luxuries for the Bakkers, private jets, expensive cars, and luxury homes. Even as the public cheered their apparent prosperity, insiders whispered about unethical fundraising practices and a culture of unquestioned loyalty. The scandal exploded in 1987 when Jessica Hahn, a church secretary, accused Jim Bakker of sexual misconduct and conspiracy to cover it up. The allegation exposed years of systemic abuse, intimidation, and concealment. It became clear that the PTL ministry, despite preaching salvation, had fostered an environment where power was exploited and ethics were subordinate to ambition. Federal prosecutors pursued Bakker for financial crimes. He was convicted of 24 counts of mail and wire fraud and conspiracy, stemming from the misappropriation of over $158 million in donations. In 1989, he was sentenced to 45 years in prison, later reduced to 8 years and fined $500,000. Heritage USA filed for bankruptcy, leaving thousands of donors, employees, and residents betrayed and financially devastated. Tammy Faye, meanwhile, struggled with public scrutiny, personal loss, and the collapse of her ministry. She continued to broadcast and preach sporadically, becoming a symbol of survival in the face of scandal. Though she eventually divorced Jim Bakker, she remained a beloved cultural figure until her death in 2007. Reflection. The Bakker story is a vivid portrait of how charisma and faith can be weaponized for personal gain. Behind the masks of holiness and hope, greed and deceit thrived. Millions entrusted their money, time, and trust to these leaders, only to discover the fragility of appearances. Faith, when exploited, becomes both a tool and a trap, a lesson that echoes in every scandal that followed. Benny Hinn, born Tufik Benedictus Hinn on December 3, 1952, in Jaffa, Israel, is a televangelist widely known for his miracle healing crusades, charismatic preaching style, and global media presence. Hinn emigrated to Canada in the 1960s and became involved with Pentecostal churches, eventually developing a unique approach to evangelism centered on dramatic faith healing events. His services promised divine intervention, emotional transformation, and physical cures, attracting thousands to stadiums worldwide and millions more via television broadcasts. Hinn's rise to fame was fueled by his ability to combine theatrical presentation with religious messaging. Crowds at his healing crusades were carefully orchestrated, with volunteers assisting in dramatic displays of faith and apparent miraculous cures. Viewers and attendees were encouraged to donate generously to support his ministry, with the promise that their contributions would multiply blessings, healings, and spiritual rewards. This blend of charisma, spectacle, and emotional appeal created immense influence, positioning Hinn as one of the most recognizable televangelists in the world. However, Hinn's ministry soon became the subject of controversy and investigation. Critics and investigative journalists alleged that many of the healings reported during crusades were staged or exaggerated. Former employees claimed that the ministry sometimes manipulated participants for dramatic effect, encouraging people to appear sick or feign ailments to enhance the appearance of miraculous intervention. Skeptics questioned the authenticity of Hinn's practices, citing lack of medical documentation, inconsistent reporting of outcomes, and the psychological pressure placed on participants to demonstrate faith and gratitude publicly. In addition to concerns about the authenticity of healings, Hinn faced serious scrutiny regarding financial practices. Reports suggested that donations to his ministry, often sourced from devoted followers, were used to fund an extravagant lifestyle, rather than strictly for charitable or religious purposes. Hinn owned multiple luxury properties, private jets, and vehicles, and was accused of promoting wealth accumulation among ministry leaders, while emphasizing the necessity of donations from congregants. These allegations contributed to a broader debate about ethical stewardship and accountability within faith-based organizations, particularly those operating on a global media scale. The controversy surrounding Hinn reached a national stage in 2007, when the United States Senate Finance Committee launched an investigation into his ministry. Senators questioned the use of funds, the transparency of financial reporting, and the ethical responsibility of soliciting donations with promises of divine intervention. Hinn and his legal team defended the ministry, asserting that all funds were used appropriately for evangelism, humanitarian efforts, and ministry operations. Nevertheless, the investigation intensified public scrutiny, placing Hinn under a media spotlight that highlighted the tension between religious influence and financial accountability. Beyond financial and authenticity concerns, Hinn faced personal scandals that affected public perception. Reports emerged about alleged marital issues, claims of infidelity, and criticism from fellow religious leaders who questioned his methods and motivations. The combination of personal controversy, financial opacity, and disputed miracle claims created a complex portrait. a man of immense influence whose methods and behavior provoked deep ethical and spiritual debate. Despite these controversies, Hinn maintained a loyal following. Millions continued to watch his broadcasts, attend his crusades, and contribute financially to his ministry. His ability to inspire faith, hope, and emotional transformation remained undeniable, demonstrating the enduring appeal of charismatic religious figures. Hinn often framed criticism as attacks on his ministry and a misunderstanding of divine work, emphasizing personal humility, repentance, and devotion as central themes in his public statements. The Benny Hinn case illustrates broader systemic issues in modern televangelism and large-scale religious operations. Scholars, theologians, and media analysts have explored how charisma, spectacle, and authority can be combined to influence millions while raising questions about accountability, ethics, and protection of vulnerable participants. Hinn's ministry, while inspiring for many, also demonstrates the potential for manipulation when religious leaders operate with limited oversight and immense media power. Hinn's story also sparked dialogue about psychological and social dimensions of faith healing. Critics argued that the emotional intensity of his services could pressure individuals into public displays of belief, create unrealistic expectations about health outcomes, and divert attention from medical or social solutions. Proponents maintained that faith healing provided genuine spiritual support, community, and hope, highlighting the complex balance between spiritual inspiration and ethical responsibility in religious leadership. In the aftermath of the Senate investigation and media scrutiny, Hinn continued to preach, conduct global healing events, and broadcast programs. While his influence has fluctuated over time, the controversies remain a defining element of his legacy. Observers note that Hinn's ministry serves as both a case study in the power of charismatic religious leadership and a cautionary tale about transparency, ethics, and the consequences of blending spiritual authority with personal gain. Reflection: Benny Hinn's life and ministry illustrate the seductive power of charisma and spectacle in religious leadership. His story raises difficult questions about trust, accountability, and the responsibility of leaders who wield influence over the vulnerable. While Hinn has inspired faith and hope in millions, his controversies serve as a reminder that the sins of religious shepherds often manifest not only in personal misconduct, but in systemic practices that blur ethical boundaries and exploit devotion. The legacy of Hinn's ministry challenges audiences to consider how faith, leadership, and accountability intersect in profound and sometimes unsettling ways. Eddie Lee Long was born in 1953 in Charlotte, North Carolina, and raised in a working-class family. From a young age, he was drawn to the church, where he developed both a deep sense of religious conviction and an extraordinary gift for public speaking. By the time he entered seminary, Long had already begun to envision a ministry that would reach thousands. His charisma, authoritative preaching style, and compelling personal story enabled him to connect with congregants on a personal and spiritual level. After completing his education at Norfolk State University and later theological training, Long began his pastoral career in modest churches before founding New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Decatur, Georgia, in the 1980s. Under his leadership, New Birth grew rapidly, transforming from a small congregation into a sprawling megachurch, attracting tens of thousands of attendees each week. Long emphasized messages of prosperity, success, and personal empowerment alongside spiritual devotion. He preached that faith and obedience to God could manifest not only spiritual blessings but tangible, material success. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Long had become one of the most prominent religious figures in the United States. His sermons were broadcast nationally, and he cultivated relationships with political leaders, celebrities, and influential figures in the African American community. New Birth Missionary Baptist Church expanded its campus, acquiring massive facilities, media operations, and affiliated schools. Long himself acquired considerable wealth, including luxury homes, private jets, and high-end vehicles, all framed as evidence of God's favor for a faithful servant. However, beneath the polished exterior of success, serious allegations began to surface. In 2010, 4 young men, all former members of New Birth, filed lawsuits claiming that Bishop Long had sexually coerced and manipulated them over a period of years. The men alleged that Long used his position of authority and spiritual influence to pressure them into sexual relationships, exploiting their trust and the hierarchical structure of the church. While the allegations did not involve overt publicized violence, the claims pointed to a profound abuse of spiritual and institutional authority, a betrayal of trust that reverberated throughout the community. The lawsuits became national news, drawing widespread media attention and prompting intense scrutiny of Long's ministry. He initially denied wrongdoing, describing the accusations as attempts to tarnish his reputation and destabilize the church. Legal experts noted that the complexity of the cases, coupled with the powerful position Long held in his community, presented significant challenges for investigators and plaintiffs alike. Public reaction was mixed. Some congregants defended their bishop passionately, insisting on his integrity and spiritual authority, while others were shocked and disillusioned by the allegations. During this period, several financial and administrative controversies within New Birth also came to light. Reports indicated that church funds had been used to support Long's lavish lifestyle and to settle previous allegations discreetly. While these financial arrangements did not result in criminal charges, they contributed to a growing perception that the church's hierarchical power structure allowed a single individual to wield near absolute control over congregants' spiritual and personal lives. In 2011, after months of legal negotiation, Long reached confidential settlements with the plaintiffs, avoiding a public trial. The terms were not disclosed, but the resolution ended the litigation while leaving questions about accountability, transparency, and institutional oversight unresolved. For the victims, the settlement provided financial recognition, but not necessarily closure or validation in the public eye. Despite the scandals, Long attempted to maintain his ministry. He returned to preaching, emphasizing forgiveness, repentance, and restoration, while continuing to manage New Birth's operations. However, the damage to his reputation was irreversible. Attendance declined, and former congregants publicly criticized the church for failing to protect young men from abuse. Media commentary framed Long's case as emblematic of the broader vulnerabilities inherent in megachurch hierarchies, particularly when charismatic authority goes unchecked. Long's health also became a topic of public discussion. In 2016, at age 63, he passed away from an aggressive form of cancer. His death closed a chapter on one of the most controversial figures in modern American religious life, leaving behind a ministry with both devoted followers and a legacy of skepticism and controversy. His death did not erase the pain experienced by the victims nor the questions raised about institutional safeguards within large churches. For sociologists and scholars of religion, Eddie Long's story highlights the intersection of charisma, power, and vulnerability within faith-based organizations. His life illustrates how spiritual authority can be leveraged to inspire both devotion and, in some cases, manipulation. The case prompted conversations about safeguards for young members, ethical leadership, and the importance of independent oversight within megachurch environments. Beyond the immediate legal and organizational implications, Long's case resonated culturally. It fueled national debates on the accountability of religious leaders, the ethics of prosperity preaching, and the responsibilities of congregants and church boards in monitoring the actions of senior clergy. Survivors and advocates have since used Long's case to push for reforms and to encourage other victims to come forward, emphasizing that spiritual leadership should never be a shield for abuse or exploitation. The story of Eddie Long remains both a cautionary tale and a lens through which to examine the complex dynamics of modern faith leadership. It underscores the dangers inherent when concentrated authority is coupled with wealth, influence, and personal charisma. Trust, once invested, can be profoundly violated when accountability structures fail, and the ripple effects are felt across communities, families, and generations. Reflection. Eddie Long's rise and fall challenge audiences to consider the human cost of unbridled power within religious institutions. His life illustrates that moral authority is not inherent to titles, and that even revered spiritual figures can exploit trust when systems fail to protect the vulnerable. The case remains a stark reminder of the need for transparency, oversight, and vigilance in institutions that wield influence over both faith and daily life. Robert Tilton, born on February 14, 1946, in Grand Prairie, Texas, rose to national prominence during the 1980s as a televangelist known for his faith-healing crusades and massive media ministry. Tilton preached the prosperity gospel, promising followers that financial donations to his ministry would result in spiritual blessings, miraculous healing, and personal prosperity. His style was characterized by theatrical sermon delivery, emotional appeals, and large-scale revival events that captivated millions. Tilton's rise mirrored the golden era of televangelism, when charismatic preachers leveraged television to reach nationwide audiences. His Success in Life program became one of the most widely broadcast religious shows in the United States, airing on hundreds of channels and reaching tens of millions weekly. Tilton's charisma, combined with carefully orchestrated events and mass mailings soliciting donations, created a highly effective system for both spiritual influence and financial gain. However, Tilton's success masked troubling patterns. Investigative journalism revealed that his ministry engaged in widespread financial manipulation, including aggressive solicitation of funds from followers, often exploiting their faith, personal hardships, and desperation. Televised appeals featured individuals supposedly healed or blessed after sending contributions, but behind the scenes, the authenticity of these claims was frequently questioned. A landmark ABC News primetime live investigation in 1991 exposed many instances where Tilton's organization had discarded prayer requests and donation letters without review, undermining the legitimacy of the televised miracles. The scandal reached a peak when the investigation revealed that Tilton was living a lavish lifestyle, funded by millions of dollars in donations. Audiences learned that he owned luxury homes, expensive vehicles, and extravagant personal amenities, all financed by contributions intended for ministry work. These revelations shocked supporters who had invested their trust and financial resources, many of whom were middle and working-class Americans. The disconnect between Tilton's public message of faith, simplicity, and spiritual purity and his private accumulation of wealth fueled outrage across religious communities and the general public alike. Tilton's televised response attempted to frame the criticism as persecution against a man of God, emphasizing that the attacks were motivated by jealousy or misunderstanding. Nevertheless, public trust was severely eroded. Congregants and viewers questioned not only Tilton's personal integrity, but the broader system of televangelism that enabled charismatic leaders to operate with minimal accountability. The case became a benchmark for discussions on ethics, financial transparency, and moral responsibility in religious broadcasting. Investigations also highlighted a systemic pattern of misleading fundraising tactics. Ministry employees admitted that letters from donors, often including desperate pleas for divine intervention, were processed in bulk without verification, yet were presented to the public as evidence of miraculous healing. The ethical implications were profound. Followers believed that their donations were directly facilitating divine intervention, when in reality the system manipulated appearances to increase contributions. This manipulation of faith for financial gain sparked nationwide debate over the regulation of religious media and the responsibilities of leaders to their followers. The controversy also had legal and organizational consequences. While Tilton faced significant public scrutiny and reputational damage, he avoided criminal conviction for fraud due to the complexities of proving intent and the protections often afforded to religious organizations under U.S. law. Nevertheless, the scandal precipitated a decline in his ministry's influence and funding, forcing Tilton to restructure his operations, scale back media outreach, and attempt to rebuild public credibility. Psychologists and theologians have analyzed Tilton's ministry as a case study in the intersection of charisma, media influence, and ethical failure. The appeal of televised faith healing lies in its emotional resonance, combining hope, fear, and desire for transformation. Tilton exploited these psychological dynamics, creating a feedback loop that reinforced donor behavior, elevated his public persona, and obscured the realities of financial and spiritual mismanagement. Despite the controversy, Tilton continued to preach and maintain a smaller-scale ministry in subsequent years. He frequently emphasized repentance, humility, and dedication to spiritual service, attempting to rehabilitate his reputation among followers who remained loyal or returned after the scandal. Yet, the shadow of his televised scandals remained, shaping public perception and reinforcing cautionary lessons about the potential for abuse when spiritual authority is concentrated and unchecked. Tilton's story is emblematic of a broader pattern in televangelism, the tension between genuine religious inspiration and the potential for financial exploitation. It underscores the vulnerabilities inherent in systems where public trust is leveraged for personal gain and highlights the ethical responsibilities of leaders who command both spiritual and financial influence. The combination of charisma, media access, and a trusting audience creates both immense potential and significant risk. Reflection. Robert Tilton's rise and fall reminds viewers that religious leaders wield immense power over the vulnerable and faithful. His case demonstrates how easily trust can be manipulated when ethical oversight is weak and charisma is weaponized for personal enrichment. Tilton's story is not only a tale of personal failure, but a systemic caution about the seductions of wealth, spectacle, and unchecked authority in modern faith communities. The sins of the shepherd, as in Tilton's case, can ripple far beyond individual misconduct, affecting institutions, believers, and the public perception of religious leadership for generations. Jimmy Lee Swaggart was born on March 15, 1935, in Faraday, Louisiana, a small town deeply rooted in Baptist and Pentecostal traditions. From a young age, Swaggart displayed remarkable musical talent and an ability to captivate audiences with his voice. Raised in a devout family, he was encouraged to pursue both preaching and music. learning to play the piano and develop his charismatic speaking style. His early ministry combined gospel music with impassioned sermons, allowing him to connect emotionally with congregants and establish a reputation for heartfelt spiritual guidance. By the 1960s, Swaggart had begun broadcasting sermons over local radio, quickly gaining attention for his fiery preaching and gospel performances. His ministry expanded in scope and ambition, culminating in the establishment of Jimmy Swaggart Ministries, which became one of the most prominent Pentecostal organizations in the United States. Swaggart's programs reached millions nationwide, blending sermons, musical performances, and heartfelt appeals for donations. His teachings emphasized holiness, obedience to God, and the dangers of sin, creating an image of moral authority that resonated deeply with followers across religious and social lines. At the height of his influence in the 1970s and 1980s, Swaggart was considered a spiritual guide to millions. His television broadcasts aired on hundreds of channels, featuring worship services, personal testimonies, and teachings on Scripture. Viewers contributed generously to his ministry, trusting that their donations supported the spread of the gospel. Swaggart's fame was amplified by his dynamic presentation style, often combining music, sermonizing, and emotional appeals that made his programs both spiritually and emotionally engaging. However, in 1988, Swaggart's public persona and ministry were shaken to their core. The LaSalle Parish Sheriff's Department in Louisiana revealed that Swaggart had engaged in sexual activity with a prostitute. The investigation was prompted by reports from the woman involved, who later corroborated the encounter. Confronted with mounting evidence, Swaggart initially denied the allegations but soon admitted to moral failings in a nationally televised confession. The revelation stunned followers, media outlets, and the broader religious community. Millions who had regarded him as a moral authority struggled to reconcile the teachings of his sermons with the personal actions now publicly disclosed. The scandal dominated national headlines. Swaggart's televised confession was an emotional spectacle, where he tearfully admitted to sins he described as a betrayal of his ministry, family, and God's trust. The fallout was immediate. Donations to his ministry plummeted, congregants expressed shock and disappointment, and rival religious leaders debated the implications for the Pentecostal community. The emotional impact on viewers, some of whom had been lifelong followers, was profound. For many, Swaggart's actions represented a breach of spiritual and moral trust that left lasting scars. Beyond the sexual scandal, scrutiny also extended to Swaggart's financial operations. While there was no criminal conviction for financial misconduct, investigations revealed that his ministry had accumulated millions of dollars in donations, prompting questions about accountability, transparency, and the proper use of resources. Critics argued that the Swaggart case exemplified the dangers of unchecked religious authority, where fame, financial power, and spiritual influence could mask human weakness and ethical lapses. Swaggart's ministry, once a symbol of Pentecostal influence, faced internal crises as staff, congregants, and supporters grappled with the implications of his misconduct. Some former followers left the church entirely, while others stayed, hoping that repentance and restitution could restore integrity to the ministry. Swaggart himself continued preaching after the scandal, seeking to rebuild his reputation and ministry, emphasizing themes of repentance, forgiveness, and personal renewal. His ability to return to public ministry highlighted both the resilience of charismatic authority and the challenges faced by communities in navigating faith, trust, and moral failure. The scandal also sparked wider conversations about televangelism in America. Other prominent ministers, including Jerry Falwell, Oral Roberts, and Jimmy Bakker, faced scrutiny for financial and moral conduct, leading to national debates about accountability, ethics, and transparency in religious broadcasting. Swaggart's case, in particular, illustrated the tension between public persona and private behavior, highlighting how media amplification could both inspire devotion and intensify scrutiny. Psychologists and sociologists have studied Swaggart's rise and fall as an example of how charisma, religious authority, and mass communication can create both influence and vulnerability. His ability to inspire millions of followers demonstrated the powerful role of emotional connection in religious leadership, while his moral failings revealed the risks inherent when systems of oversight and accountability are absent or inadequate. For religious communities, the Swaggart scandal served as a catalyst for examining how faith institutions address misconduct, support victims, and maintain public trust. In the years following the scandal, Swaggart attempted to reclaim spiritual authority. He continued preaching, performing music, and authoring writings focused on repentance and moral recovery. While some congregants returned and others admired his persistence, the shadow of the scandal remained a defining element of his legacy. For many observers, Swaggart's story serves as both a cautionary tale and a lens through which to understand the vulnerabilities of religious leadership in the modern media age. The emotional and social impact of Swaggart's fall extended beyond his immediate ministry. Families and communities who had trusted him experienced disillusionment, and some former followers sought counseling and spiritual guidance to process the breach of trust. Church boards, seminaries, and religious organizations began implementing policies emphasizing accountability, oversight, and pastoral ethics. These reforms, in part inspired by Swaggart's public scandal, aimed to prevent similar breaches of trust and moral failure within faith communities. Reflection. Jimmy Swaggart's story illustrates the precarious balance between spiritual authority, human frailty, and public trust. His rise demonstrates the inspiring potential of charismatic religious leadership, while his fall reveals the profound consequences when personal morality fails to match public teaching. The scandal leaves audiences with a haunting reminder. Even the most revered spiritual leaders are fallible, and the responsibility of oversight, ethical guidance, and accountability is essential for protecting both faith and followers from betrayal. In the heart of Columbus, Ohio, a towering megachurch looms over the suburban landscape, its glass and steel reflecting both sunlight and ambition. At the center stands Parsley, a preacher whose dynamic presence, booming voice, and passionate delivery have drawn thousands to the World Harvest Church. With television broadcasts spanning continents, Parsley became both a spiritual guide and a media powerhouse, blending political engagement, prosperity teachings, and personal charisma into an empire of influence. Yet behind the inspirational facade, critics and investigative journalists have long scrutinized the intersection of faith, fortune, and power in his ministry. Parsley was born in 1957 in Cleveland, Ohio, into a deeply religious family. From an early age, he exhibited exceptional oratory skills and an innate ability to engage audiences. By his teenage years, he was preaching in local churches and participating in ministry activities. His formal education included theological studies that reinforced his charismatic style, blending Pentecostal fervor with a contemporary approach to media and outreach. By the 1980s, Parsley had begun founding churches and broadcast ministries, demonstrating an entrepreneurial vision that mirrored his spiritual ambition. Parsley's rise to prominence coincided with the growth of American televangelism and the emergence of political engagement as a facet of religious leadership. World Harvest Church, under Parsley's leadership, expanded rapidly, drawing tens of thousands of congregants weekly. Sermons emphasized personal transformation, moral responsibility, and the prosperity gospel, linking faith and devotion with tangible outcomes in health, wealth, and success. Television broadcasts, books, and conferences extended his reach, cultivating a national and international following eager for guidance, inspiration, and spiritual empowerment. Critics, however, have long raised questions about financial transparency and accountability within Parsley's ministry. Reports indicate that the church operates extensive revenue streams including donations, media sales, and merchandise, while Parsley and his organization maintain that all funds support ministry operations, educational initiatives, and community outreach. Investigative scrutiny highlights the potential for wealth accumulation and lifestyle benefits for leadership. Luxury residences, private aircraft, and high-profile events are emblematic of prosperity-focused ministries, raising ethical debates about the relationship between faith, influence, and personal enrichment. Parsley's political engagement further complicated perceptions. He frequently addressed national issues, advocating for conservative policies and candidates, framing political involvement as an extension of moral and spiritual responsibility. While supporters praised this engagement as principled leadership, critics argued that blending political influence with religious authority risked exploiting congregants' trust, leveraging spiritual guidance for ideological or material ends. This intersection of faith and politics intensified public scrutiny and sparked debates about the appropriate boundaries of religious leadership. In addition to financial and political concerns, Parsley faced allegations regarding internal church management and control over staff. Former employees described highly centralized authority, expectations of loyalty, and mechanisms that discouraged dissent or critique. While these practices are not uncommon in large ministries, they underscore the power dynamics inherent in charismatic religious leadership, where influence is concentrated in a single figure. For congregants, this dynamic often manifests as a profound trust in the leader, coupled with vulnerability to guidance that may be self-serving or ethically ambiguous. Despite controversy, Parsley's ministry has produced tangible impact. Educational initiatives, outreach programs, and charitable activities have reached thousands, providing resources, mentorship, and community support. Followers recount spiritual transformation, personal breakthroughs, and inspiration derived from his preaching. Yet, the duality of Parsley's influence, both empowering and potentially exploitative, highlights the persistent tension in modern religious megachurches, the coexistence of spiritual guidance, personal enrichment, and concentrated authority. Reflection. Rod Parsley's story exemplifies the subtle, pervasive power of charisma, media, and religious authority. The pastor's mask, in this case, conceals both inspiration and ambition, illustrating the complex interplay of faith, fortune, and influence. Congregants invest belief, time, and resources in leaders they trust, sometimes overlooking ethical ambiguities in favor of spiritual guidance. Parsley's saga reminds viewers that even well-intentioned ministries can cultivate environments where authority, wealth, and influence converge, demanding vigilance, discernment, and accountability. The lesson is clear. Faith is a profound force, but when intertwined with unchecked power, it can both elevate and exploit those who place their trust in the pulpit. Which of these cases shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments. For more real-life crime stories, subscribe and stay tuned for the next deep dive.